Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, literature, and popular culture. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the program. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by co-host and producer Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how you doing?
I'm not doing too bad. Bruce, how's everything going with you?
Good. We put up our Christmas tree about a week ago. It has not fallen down yet. It actually went up surprisingly quickly, maybe a record for us. Pretty unusual. Normally we have something go haywire, but not this time.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. You don't need a topple down tree.
And you were telling me you've had some concerns with your tree because your cat likes to eat it.
Unfortunately, it's an artificial tree, but it's a lighted tree, and my new little kitten, Pugsley Adams, who's almost 9 months old now, he likes
Yeah.
to eat the light bulbs right off the tree, and that's kind of not a good thing. So I have a citronella deterrent to kind of keep him away. But yeah, it's not cool. And then minimal decorations I might add as well. So yeah, that'll be our Christmas this year.
Nice. Sometimes our pets, as much as we love them, do not completely understand how the holidays work. So we have to go through these various safeguards.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of Christmas, that is going to be our theme for this week's edition of the Ghostly Gallery. This week, our returning guest is Kirk Hazen. Kirk is a musical composer. He has worked on several films. He's also a general expert and historian on the genre of horror. We had Kirk on several months ago. We discussed with him the Count Yorga movies, the Blackula films as well, the films of David Cronenberg, a lot of the work of John Carpenter. We had kind of a nice wide-ranging conversation in those areas. This time around, though, we're going to talk to Kirk about something completely different. This time, Kirk will discuss his favorite Christmas-themed horror films. Kirk, welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery. How have you been?
I've been pretty busy with the Christmas season. I've been well, but it's been a heck of a lead up trying to get everything done, shopping for the kids and all that stuff. I'm actually looking forward to taking a little bit of a break here heading into Christmas. And it's interesting. I know the last episode you guys talked about how much you disliked the things getting dark and, the whole autumnal equinox thing, time change. And it's weird because living in Western Pennsylvania, I am used to the seasons. I think we all are where we live.
Mhm.
And I kind of love it. I love the change because this past summer was so sweltering. It was an inferno, it felt like. And I got so worn out on that I embrace the dark, somber season, the cloudy skies, because I know it'll change. And in Pittsburgh, especially, the weather changes like in an instant. But yeah, I'm kind of absorbing the season and enjoying, what comes down the road.
Yeah, I really don't mind the cold so much of the winter, but I guess it is the darkness, getting dark at 4:20, 4:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a discouraging thing to me. I always look forward to December 21st. Well, for two reasons. We know Christmas is around the corner, but also the days do start to get slightly longer. And you start thinking about the new year, you start thinking about spring being around the corner. And those are some of the things that kind of go through my mind. So we are going to talk about Christmas extensively. We did a show like this last year with our friend Josh Hitchens, who broke down about 8 or 9 of his favorite Christmas horror films. We're going to do something a little bit similar with you. Some of the films that you have picked, just a couple are the same as what Josh had, but you also have a lot of different ones. So we're going to get some real variety, including some films that I have never seen before. Tracy has not seen before. So we'll have a chance to learn about them. We're going to, for the most part, tackle these Christmas horror films in chronological order. We're going to start with something that's really interesting. It's a series of films that goes back to 1971. It's called A Ghost Story for Christmas. So this is a BBC production, the British Broadcasting Corporation. did these on an annual basis from 1971 to 78. They then stopped doing them, but then kind of revived them sporadically starting in 2005. So we're going to talk about that early run from 71 to 78. And I understand, Kirk, that a lot of these stories are based on a great writer of ghost stories, M.R. James.
Yes, indeed. A lot of them, especially in the early iteration of the show, and even the later ones. They've remade a couple. The Mark Gatiss Resurrected show. Yeah, one of my favorite M.R. James stories is Whistle and I'll Come to You. And the way he does a lot of his ghost stories, it has a folk horror tinge to it. Forbidden knowledge, finding an old artifact, something along those lines. And I find that genuinely creepy. You just like the Evil Dead, you stumble upon the Book of the Dead, that type of thing. And Whistle and I'll Come to You, a professor finds a flute or a whistle and unwittingly plays it and attracts something from the other side.
With these stories, I assume these are relatively short stories, but then the BBC had to stretch them out, into hour-long or more than hour-long formats?
Some of them are, I believe some of them are half hour, but mostly like 40 minutes to 50 minutes. The new ones, I think, are longer. The earlier ones are, I think, a bit briefer.
Who were some of the actors that were featured in these films?
Gosh, and the old versions, I can't remember any names, to be honest, any major players. It's not like Michael Caine was in Whistle and I'll Come to You, although I kind of wish he was. Yeah. The guys that are in it, though, the actors that are in it are all fine British thespians. But yeah, there's no, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head that's a name. And not like the Hammer shows where they had guest stars, the Hammer House of Horror, and every episode had a couple of recognizable faces. And I think in a way it makes it scarier. That these, old British ghost stories are populated by actors that I haven't seen as much of. It gives it some verisimilitude and a reality to it.
I looked at a list very quickly. The one name that jumped out at me was Denholm Elliott.
Oh, gosh. Weird that I missed him. Was he in the Ice House or one of the later ones? Because I definitely spot him.
One of the middle ones, 75, 76, somewhere around there. He was really the only name that jumped out at me.
Yeah.
And of course, he certainly did a fair share of horror. He was in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He did a number of other movies too. Tremendous English actor. So the first five are based on M.R. James. And for those who are not familiar with him, he is considered one of the great ghost writers, writers of ghost stories, I should say, not ghost writers. Our friend from the Rosenbach, Edward Pettit, loves M.R. James, and I take it you're a fan too.
Definitely. Yeah, as a kid, I had a M.R. James collection when I was probably about 10, along with Robert Bloch and various authors. And his stuff is just so atmospheric and immersive. And I like that, he tackles the supernatural in a way that doesn't feel over the top. It's rooted in some level of reality, like A Warning to the Curious. In that one, an archaeologist is looking for a British crown or an ancient crown that is said to protect Britain from invasion. And no one knows how far back the crown goes in terms of its history. But there's something about that is rooted in a sort of reality, because in Great Britain, the countryside's littered with artifacts and coins and things buried underneath. And, that series, The Detectorists, with Toby Jones, that whole thing is based on, looking for those artifacts and taking a metal detector out into the countryside. So it's something, it feels real. I know people that have done that. My granddad used to do that here in Pennsylvania. And I always wondered, what if he finds something that he shouldn't find? It wasn't meant to. And that's a lot of M.R. James tackles that creepy, skin crawly thing, without being too strident.
As part of this series, A Ghost Story for Christmas, that the BBC did, they also included a Charles Dickens story, The Signal Man. That was part of it as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I love. I remember an old ghost story from Western Pennsylvania that dealt with a signalman and a disembodied arm, and it was probably based on Dickens' story.
Kirk, I've seen other BBC productions related to horror, ghost stories. They're always very atmospheric. They're always very well done. I have not seen these, but can you put this series in that same category?
Oh, absolutely, including the new series. Although I'd have to say I prefer the old ones. Just that, a lot of them are shot on film. Lost Hearts is my very favorite. That one has immense atmosphere and spookiness, and is probably the more overtly horrific episode of the whole thing. And yeah, I discovered these actually I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago, because I was listening to another podcast that just mentioned them, and I looked them up, and I was blown away. I wish I had grown up with these when I was a kid. Especially Lost Hearts. It felt like I had seen that as a kid in a dream, even though I didn't. It really resonated. That particular episode always feels like a warped, scary spinoff of Harry Potter, almost. If you guys haven't seen it, it's really got a vibe.
Yeah, Kirk, I have a quick question. Is this the same series that Christopher Lee also contributed to later on? Later on in kind of like, I want to say, I'm just looking at the IMDb, and he had done a couple of the series. He just narrated them. Is this the same? Wow. The same one? It's Christopher Lee's Ghost Stories for Christmas by the BBC. Is this the same type?
It sounds like it is, and weirdly, I don't know if I've seen any of those, which is bizarre. I have to. That's like a big hole in my Ghost Stories for Christmas thing. I've watched so many of them, and I've watched so many of the new ones, right. Especially with the kids the last several years, that I probably have seen one, but for whatever reason, my brain has skipped over that to the newer Mark Gatiss ones. Like John Hurt, the remake of Whistle and I'll Come to You, which is not as good as the original. Wow, I got to look that up then. That's
no, because it's funny because I was looking at it before, and when you were talking about like M.R. James stories and Christopher Lee's episodes just popped right up. He only did one season, so that's why I was curious if this was like the exact same kind of like storyline.
It certainly sounds like it's part of that flow.
Right.
And why? I remember when I first looked all these up, I looked them up on IMDb, and that I think that seemed to be separate from how it's listed on there, unless they've changed that.
Oh, it's interesting. I can't seem to find any episodes anywhere to watch because my interest was really piqued just because it's like all Christmas related. So
yeah,
I'll have to keep looking.
Yeah, that could be. The fact that I don't know as much about it, that might be the case. Maybe I looked them up and I'm like, oh, these aren't released yet. Tragically, because I'd love to see them. Anything with Christopher Lee.
No, exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kirk, the original series from the 1970s, do you know if they're available on DVD?
I think they are. Although I think they're all over YouTube as well. The last time I had looked last year. But yeah, I don't think they're domestically though. A lot of those shows, it's weird how the UK gets certain releases, like all the Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Hitchcock Hour, they have them, but we don't have an official Blu-ray version of those yet. And that might fall into that heading.
I'll have to take a look on YouTube, which would mean they're free of charge, which is always nice. So that's the BBC series. A Ghost Story for Christmas ran throughout the 1970s, and then the more recent incarnation in the early 2000s. All right, Kirk, let's jump ahead to our next production, which is a single film that came out November 17th, 1972. 1972, a couple of movies on your list from that year.
Yeah.
And this is a film that is not really that well known. It's called Silent Night, Bloody Night, not to be confused with Silent Night, Deadly Night. So totally different. Came out around Thanksgiving time, 72. It's also known by the alternate name of Death House. And I think some of the prints of the film show Death House as the title card. Stars Patrick O'Neill and a couple of horror veterans, Barry Warnoff and the great John Carradine. So for those who haven't seen this one, Kirk, give us the storyline. What happens? I know there's a pretty important thing that happens right away when a man comes out of a building on fire, but tell us exactly what happens after that.
Well, yeah, the basic setting is a small town in Massachusetts. I'm not sure if it's called Willard. They never really mention it in the movie, but this is actually shot in Long Island, New York.
Mm-hmm.
But it is under the New England Gothic kind of dramatic, almost slightly romantic vibe to it. It's this spooky house that everybody in town is afraid to go to, and suddenly it's up for sale because the grandson of the grandfather who owned the house wants to basically unload it. So he returns to town, and the rest of the town, basically, like the mayor, the police chief, John Carradine plays a newspaper printer kind of guy who owns the printing press, and even the switchboard operator. They're all very eager to see it sold or something done with it. And Patrick O'Neill, who was in Chamber of Horrors from, I believe, 1969, he is a big city lawyer, and he's there with his young girlfriend, played by a pretty famous model at the time, Astrid Heron. She was on covers of Vogue and everything, and a beautiful woman. And they basically go to the house, kind of set up shop there for the night. The lawyer goes into town to talk to this kind of odd, weird bunch of people. Like they all kind of treat him like he's an outsider, and they're very, very cagey. And you get a sense that something's going on with that bunch. And Patrick O'Neill's character, he just kind of bemused by it all. And I don't know how far I want to go into spoilers, because there is about 25, 30 minutes into the film, a really shocking murder, very, very bloody for its time. It actually aired unedited on TV. So when I saw it as a kid, I was like, wow, I can't believe how graphic that is. It goes way beyond Hitchcock. And the Mary Warnoff, who I just love, and I love her in this movie. She plays the mayor's daughter, and she's aware of the house and a little bit of its history, but there's a lot of secrets that the house has. And the grandfather's name was Wilford Butler. And in that scene in 1950, when the man was set on fire, he was said to have died, but we don't know if he has. It kind of handles things in a kind of a spooky way. And somebody unnamed escapes from an insane asylum and returns to the Butler house concurrently with the lawyer and his girlfriend and everybody else being concerned about it, and kills some people and basically makes phone calls from the house, really unsettling pre-Black Christmas phone calls that I think are almost as effective as Billy in Black Christmas, and starts calling people, including the townspeople, the mayor and whatnot, and lures them to the house one by one and kills them. And it really builds to one heck of a third act where you discover the secret of the house, which is very sordid and eerie, including a kind of sepia-toned flashback that's highly effective. Yeah, without spoiling it, it's got one heck of an ending that unsettled me when I was a kid, and still works now. The whole film, it's never been remastered or anything. So the copy on YouTube that you probably watched, that one, it's done from an old grindhouse print that was released in the early 80s. So the texture of the film, the atmosphere, it's very, very dark. It doesn't have any day for night photography. Everything's dark with Christmas lights accenting. And I really, really like this one a lot. It's spooky in kind of a haunted house way. The particular house they filmed in is a massive mansion that is now a historical site in Long Island. I think it's called the James Beekman House in Oyster Bay. I'd love to visit it someday. It's really, it's almost up there with the Black Christmas house in terms of how eerie and big it is.
Some interesting things, Kirk, about the characters or the actors that were in the film. One of them is James Patterson. He's the grandson of the original owner who is believed to have died in that fire. And he died shortly after the movie came out. Apparently, he was quite ill. I believe this was his last production. And I'm trying to remember if he passed away before the film debuted in theaters, maybe shortly thereafter. So this was kind of a somber occasion when you know that going in, that that,
Yeah.
here's a guy who's going to lose his life shortly thereafter. Mary Warnoff, who you mentioned, is a veteran of many, many horror films, including a film that Tracy and I talked about recently that we don't like called Seizure. The less said about that, the better. But she's a very good
Yes.
actress, and she's very good in this movie. And then you got John
I think she's great.
Carradine. What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think she's great in it. She's
Yes.
such a presence in any movie. But yeah, and she doesn't really like this, but she didn't have kind things to say about this movie and said it was a terrible
Really?
experience. I think it's one of her coolest early credits.
Then there's John Carradine, who has a relatively small role. You see him in a couple of scenes. The weird thing, though, he does not speak. Any guesses as to why they did that?
I'm kind of bewildered by it too. I can almost imagine
Yeah.
Carradine saying, you want me to do this movie with my voice, and you don't want me to speak? I mean, he's got such that's a bad Carradine impression, but an unbelievably great voice and physical presence.
Yeah.
And literally the only line in the movie that he has off screen is when they ask him, the group of the mayor and the sheriff ask him, well, what do you want to do with the house? And you just hear off screen, tear it down. And that's it. I don't even know if Carradine's voice was used in that scene, but it is
Really?
kind of strange. It's an odd choice.
Yeah, that is very strange. One thing I read, and I want to find out if this is true, maybe but I read on IMDb that this film, which didn't do that much at the box office, was given a real boost in the 80s when Elvira played it on her show. You know anything about that?
Yeah, Elvira's movie Macabre, and I think she did it. It might have been even in the late 70s, but definitely the early 80s. She did a couple episodes. She even did the Death Master once too. But yeah, she did that, and it kind of gained some traction. And the other thing that's neat about the history of it is it's public domain, so it ended up on tons of DVD collections and double features, and it played repeatedly in WOR out of New York, one of my favorite stations when I was a kid. They must have played it every Christmas and sometimes in the summer on Fright Night, I think it was called, and Schiller Theater here in Pittsburgh. So I've seen this movie so many times, it just kind of got embedded in my head over the years. And it also, because it is such a proto slasher before Black Christmas really kicked that off, it was re-released under Death House in 1981 to theaters during the slasher wave. With the same poster art and everything. Of course, at the time, I didn't see it in the theaters. I was watching it on TV. And I mean, this is kind of interesting that Cannon Films, which released it, and Lloyd Kaufman produced it. I'm sure Lloyd said, hey, let's get this out there and make a few more bucks. I can imagine him saying that. But it's really got a neat history. In the print on YouTube, and the one that's on my German Blu-ray import is the Death House one.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there's not an uncut version of this film, because even though that axe murder is pretty much shown in all of its horrific glory, there's a scene with John Carradine, that little quick reveal of him in the chair that's so fast that I think for whatever reason they trimmed and cut a few of the other murders, especially the most effective killing I think in the film is Tess, who goes to the house and the killer shines a light in her face and whispers to her. I think that's spectacularly eerie and one of my favorite slasher kills and spine-chillingly creepy bits in the early 70s slasher pantheon. And I would, like a lot of early 70s slashers fall under that headline, pre-Black Christmas, like The Severed Arm from 1973, Haunted House of Horror from 1970, Tower of Evil from 72. But I think Silent Night's probably the best of those.
Final question for me, Kirk, on Silent Night, Bloody Night. Do you think it did influence Black Christmas? Was that something that Bob Clark was motivated by? Did he ever talk about that?
I never heard him talk about it, and I've listened extensively to Bob Clark interviews on it, and I've never heard him mention it. And I wish I could have eventually met him and asked him, because it did, it was shot in 1970 in November, December, but released in 72, and that's enough lead time for Black Christmas to be influenced by it. because those phone calls, they are spooky and they kind of fall under that vibe, that feeling. I like to look at it as a companion. That's why I watch them both every Christmas, sometimes twice each. And yeah, that influence there. Who knows? I kind of hope it did influence it, because Black Christmas took it and ran with that beautifully. But it is a neat little thing to have in Silent Night, Bloody Night, and really, eerie.
Oh, wow. I'll have to check that one out. I haven't seen that one at all. So I'll add that to my Christmas watch list. But the next one that we're going to pop off to is from 1972, and it is Home for the Holidays. And it is actually a made-for-TV movie. Can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, that's a neat little movie, directed by John Llewellyn Moxley, who is a journeyman director with tons of TV credits, but he also did a lot of TV movies, including directing Kolchak's The Night Stalker pilot with Janos Skorzeny. That, every time I see something by John Llewellyn Moxley, it's worth watching. And that film, it is another proto-slasher. It doesn't lean too heavily in the stalk and slash aspect, but there is a raincoat killer with a hood over his face, or her face. It's that kind of thing. And carrying a pitchfork and knocking off the cast members. And the cast is tremendous. Sally Field, Jessica Walter, Julie Harris, Jill Howarth, the British actress, Eleanor Parker, Walter Brennan's in it, even. And Sally Field is probably the one featured the most. She's kind of the Jess Bradford of the film, the final girl type of character. But a bunch of family members, these sisters, returned to an estate for the holidays. I think it's New England, so it's kind of a New England Gothic kind of movie, like Silent Night, Bloody Night. And they're there to visit their terminally ill father, who claims that his new girlfriend wife, Julie Harris, might be trying to kill him. And so everybody's sort of suspecting each other and her. It's got a lot of red herrings. And, Walter Brennan, it's kind of neat to see him in that, she's trying to kill me, that Walter Brennan kind of vibe, usually see in a Western, but here he is, playing the patriarch of a clan. I really like it. It's certainly, to me, not as scary as Silent Night, Bloody Night, or definitely not Black Christmas, but it's got a vibe to it, almost like it's between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Lots of rain, not as much snow, but it really works. It's short and sweet. But it's Home for the Holidays is pretty well regarded amongst fans these days. And it was on home video for years back in the 80s, and a lot of TV airings. Another one of those ones that really got saturated in the market.
Oh, interesting. Is that one available on YouTube or Tubi?
It is actually, yeah. If I had my stuff together, I would have sent you guys the link for that too. But yeah, you can find it in several different versions. Some of them are hosted by horror hosts. There's one that's just the movie itself, and that's the best one.
Oh, how cool! Okay. Oh, interesting. I've not seen it, but it sounds kind of interesting. I do like Sally Field. It's been a really long time since I've seen a movie like with her in it, so
she's so young, and it's like I had a massive crush on Sally Field as a kid, and she's probably like 22 here. Is before Smokey and the Bandit and after The Flying Nun, and she's great in it.
Oh my gosh! Oh wow! Bruce, have you seen that film?
I have not. I tried to find it on a couple of streaming services. I couldn't. I should have looked at YouTube, but I didn't, and I'll have to do that this week.
Same here.
Yeah, it's just worth it.
Oh, well,
I used to watch Sally Field on a regular basis in The Flying Nun, which I think is probably one of the more ridiculous comedies I've ever watched, but it has a quality to it all these years later.
It does. I watched it as a kid, but my parents would throw it on sometimes, and I just like, what is this concept? Like, is she Superman or Superwoman? Just weird enough to be cool. And anything with Sally Field, it is. Norma Ray, I like that as a kid, and that's not a kid movie, but she was in it, and I watched it.
Oh gosh. So let's go back to Black Christmas from 1974. Bruce and I, we chatted about this film not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago. And, it was the first time I actually saw the original. and it was wonderful. Why is this one of your favorite films?
Oh, it goes all the way back to the first time I saw it in November of 1982. I saw it on HBO under the title Stranger in the House.
Mhm.
And it was on, I think, after Escape from New York or something. And I thought, oh, what's this? There's a point of view shot in the beginning of this movie, and it's creepy. And for the next hour and a half, I sat there riveted. The ending shook me. I had a sleeping bag that I turned the TV off and I put myself in the sleeping bag and pulled a little tie so just my nose peeked out. I was so scared. My parents and sister were asleep and I didn't want to wake them. And I spent the rest of the night on the living room floor terrified. That's never left me. I mean, I can watch it now and not be that scared, but it's still to this day. I saw it in college on VHS and rediscovered it several years later. Fell in love with it, and to me, it's a 5-star horror masterpiece, and easily in my top 5 horror movies of all time. I just love it. It's got atmosphere to burn. Bob Clark's direction, the camera work, Reginald Morris's cinematography, Carl Zitterer's score, everything just works. Not to mention the performances. To me, Livia Hussey is one of the great final girls. There's just so much about it. Lynn Griffin and Art Hindle, two great Canadian actors. I've always loved Lynn, and it's tremendous. And the whole film itself, to me, it is a slasher, but there's something about Billy being a disembodied voice most of the time, or an eye in the doorway crack, that almost makes it seem like he's a ghost, and the sorority house is a haunted house. That's the feeling I had when I first saw it, and the feeling I still get. It's more than a slasher sometimes. He's almost supernaturally insane. On a Michael Myers level. He almost scares me more than Michael Myers in many ways. I just, on every level, I think it's great. Now, I love the characters. They're fun. They're realistic. Miss Mac, Margot Kidder's Barb. She's such a jerk in the beginning, but she's funny, and then she's sad. She's sort of this sad alcoholic girl who her mom rejected her because she's going to be with her boyfriend, like that phone call that she has in the beginning. And there's that line off camera where Barb goes, "You're a real gold-plated whore, mother." And you just hear that, and you're not privy to the whole conversation, but you just see, her disappointment. And then she says, "Hey, to the rest of the girls, anybody want to go skiing at Mount Holly?" Because her family plans are dashed, and she starts drinking. And the whole film sort of attends to, I don't know, family trauma, interpersonal trauma, Jess and Peter and their whole thing.
That's right.
There's somebody, I have to say something that's really interesting after seeing this movie so many times. And I love all the characters, and I see their faults and their positives as well. But Jess and Peter, it's a very toxic relationship. Jess has clearly got one foot out the door. Peter is very intense and very serious, and also kind of, I don't know, mansplainy, and doesn't really consider her feelings. Like, I'm quitting the conservatory and we're getting married. And she's like, "What? You made that decision all on your own? Great." That whole bit. And then I also think, like, the abortion thing is intense too, because you totally see her point of view, but you also see him being rattled by it, that decision. And that line, just like having a wart removed and then having the killer repeat that, all of that swirling around. And the one thing I'll say about Jess, I love her, and she's kind of faultless, except she goes and tells Peter about the pregnancy and the abortion the afternoon before his big recital. That couldn't wait a day. That could, every time I watch it, I'm like, just call him 2 days later after the recital, because that would, your heart's not going to be in your play. As a musician, I understand that. I'm probably going to be fumbling notes and screwing up left and right when my brain is on that subject. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about this movie. And there's so many things that it influenced too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it's so gratifying that when I was a kid, nobody had seen it. I'd ask friends at school. And even when I worked in a video store at college, I'd recommend it to people, and it rattled a lot of people. People would come in and say, "I couldn't finish it. It was too scary." And interestingly, Bob Clark said that back in, I think, say the mid 70s, 76, 77. He was working on a script, I think it was about rattlesnakes or something, with John Carpenter, called Prey. And Carpenter was an admirer of Black Christmas, as anybody would be. And he said, "Hey, Bob, if you'd ever do a sequel, what would you do?" And Bob said, "Well, I'd probably have it set in Halloween night, and I'd have the killer escape and resume killing." And this is out of Bob Clark's mouth. This is on extras and interviews. And John Carpenter's never mentioned that or been asked about it, I don't think. But I got to believe Bob that on some level, John kind of took that idea and ran with it. And Bob even said, "Oh, I don't mind at all. I was never going to do it. And if John got inspired by that to make a fantastic movie like Halloween, then I'm happy," which I think Bob Clark was just a great human being in so many levels. And I love most of his movies, all the way up to Christmas Story. I mean, the fact that he made that and Black Christmas, and they're two of my favorite all-time Christmas movies, and they're both a two-hander for me, and both so different, but include a lot of the same talent, like the cinematographer and actors, and it's really got a great history behind it as well.
One other actor to mention, John Saxon.
Yes, yeah, Lieutenant Fuller. He really anchors the film, and he's a contrast with Nash, the desk sergeant. That guy. I love Doug McGrath, who showed up in a lot of Clint Eastwood movies later. I love his character. He's such a fool, but you kind of feel for him too. And Saxon's the pro, and gets Les Carlson, Canadian actor, who was in a lot of Cronenberg movies, to be the phone guy, and trace him, and then all that seriousness, and then you have Nash, who at the very end is tasked with calling Jess and being serious. Everything else has been funny up to this point, but it feels like, Miss Bradford, just listen carefully, just turn around, put the phone down, and leave the house, and I love how they kind of flip that the funny guy, the comic relief, now is the one who's given some of the spookiest lines to our final girl. But Saxon, I love John Saxon, and he does great authority figures and great villains too. Like the Maskatron in $6 Million Man. That's my first time I saw him as a kid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, no doubt. A great movie, Black Christmas, 1974. So now we're going to jump ahead chronologically. The next film on your list is from 2007, and it's not as well known a movie. It's called Inside. It's a French film, and it takes place, obviously, in France over the Christmas holiday. Tell us the story on this one.
It's a really interesting one. It gets talked a lot when you talk about the French New Wave of horror, after High Tension, a movie I didn't like. Well, after High Tension, I'm like, okay, what's the deal with the French New Wave? I haven't seen anything yet I've really liked. And then Inside came out about 2 years later. It's a real dark, intensely violent film, worth seeing at least once, though, I think. And it's a young woman. She's in an auto accident that's kind of her fault. And the person that is in the other end of the accident, who gets injured as well in another car, is a pregnant woman. And she loses her baby. So flash forward about a year or two later, the young woman who caused this accident, on Christmas Eve, she's in her house, fully pregnant, probably ready to give birth in a day or two almost. And she gets a knock on the door later at night, and it's a woman asking to be let in, and kind of in a menacing way. And it's the woman that she injured with her careless auto accident, and she wants something from her, and you can guess what it is. It's really, really eerie, dark, disturbing. It almost takes the violence to a level that's uncomfortably dark. Eventually the woman breaches the house, and then it's a cat and mouse game between the two. I can't recommend this to everybody because the ending is extremely disturbing, but everything leading up to it is so effective that it earns that ending. But the violence is just so over the top, and there's some weird little twists in it too that almost take it into, I don't know how to describe it, almost a zombie territory, with a certain character who gets a brain injury and becomes this mindless killer. I don't want to spoil anything, because if you guys see it, it'll probably knock you out. but it's nasty, and it's not movies that are this serious and violent sometimes throw me. I certainly don't mind gore, and Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite movies of all time. But when it's really gritty and it also involves something like biological, like pregnancy, it really takes it into some dark places. But extremely stylish, beautifully lit. The Christmas atmosphere, it takes place on Christmas Eve, so it's got a ton of that. I was really impressed with it, but I've only seen it twice, and it's one I won't watch this year or anytime soon. It's harsh.
Yeah. Kirk, does the widow immediately recognize the woman who comes to the door, or does it take her a while to put two and two together?
I think it takes her a while, if she ever does. I'm pretty sure at some point she does. It's been a couple years since I've seen it. But yeah, there is, I think, from her point of view, the mystery as to why. We know as the audience. But it's the woman who plays the bad lady. If you want to, she's damaged, and she lost her pregnancy, so she's very, very upset. One can understand that, kind of like on a Mrs. Voorhees level.
Yeah.
But she's vicious and monstrous, and it's Beatrice Dalle, a famous French actress, who's got a really unsettling French Barbara Steele quality to her. And the other young woman, Alison Paredes, the mom, she's great, but Beatrice Dalle is, there should probably be an action figure of her, because she's dressed all in black, like a wraith, like the Grim Reaper almost. Extremely effective performance, and one of the great villains of the French New Wave, certainly.
Final question on this one, Kirk. Is this done in French or in English?
It was definitely done in French. I'm pretty sure there's an English dub, but
Okay.
I watched it in French language, which I always prefer, the native tongue.
Okay, very good. Inside from 2007. 3 years after that, we have a film called Rare Exports, 2010. It is set in Finland on Christmas Eve. It's comedy as well as horror. Santa Claus is unearthed in an archaeological dig. Tell us about that.
Oh, it's a really neat one, a favorite of my family. Even my youngest has watched it. It takes place in snowy Finland in the mountains, and it's basically there's an archaeological dig that's a U.S.-UK co-production, and I forget exactly what they're looking for. I don't know if it's a geological survey for oil or whatever, but they stumble upon this burial mound, and they've already drilled it open, and it's this giant block of ice that has something in it. And it doesn't take you long to figure out it's some sort of Krampus. This is like after the movie Krampus, this one kind of takes it and runs in a slightly different direction. It's definitely some beast. And at the same time, concurrently, there's a group of hunters who make their living hunting reindeer, and they're finding that their entire batch of reindeer they were supposed to harvest and hunt that season had been killed, finding corpses everywhere. And you quickly find out that along with this Krampus thing that's in the ice, the opening up that hole unleashed something else. These weird elf-like creatures, these naked men with sharp teeth, and they almost look like weird skinny Santas in a strange way, but there's dozens of them, and they're the ones that have been feeding on the reindeer. And our main characters are a father-son hunting duo, played by a real father and son, Oni Tomilla and Jorma Tomilla. They're fantastic. There's a lot of great drama and comedy in the film between the father and son in terms of their livelihood is going away. They're upset at this dig that's happening, and it kind of shows you the corporate, unsympathetic corporate portrayal, like the people in charge of this dig don't really care about the impact on this village, and there's also, of course, a secret involved with that too. That's a bit nefarious. That's revealed later. But the movie stays mostly with the father and son in an incredibly poignant, effective way that just sucks you into the film. And the father eventually gets wise to what's going on and sets up a trap to get one of these weird elf creatures. And it takes he also gets his friends to help him as well, his other hunter friends. And there's such a weird direction it goes in. It's definitely horror and violent and scary. but there's this sly sense of humor throughout the whole film that it builds and builds. And then finally in the third act, now this is accomplished with a lot of CGI, there's an almost crazy Spielbergian plan to deal with these creatures and the Krampus itself. It gets outrageously funny and weird, and might turn some viewers off if you're with it. The first half of it almost feels like John Carpenter's The Thing. It just has this somber, snowy, Arctic feel because of this location, and then evolves into kind of a heartwarming but weird resolution. And then the ending, you'll never guess how the ending is going to go. I won't spoil it, but it's almost whimsical and bizarre. And it's gotten a lot of attention over the years. I think for some people that have discovered it on streaming, it's become a bit of a modern classic of its kind. And to me, the Krampus from 2015 and Rare Exports are kind of a two-hander, double feature. I really love them both. The Krampus is more straight horror, but both of them definitely qualify as horror comedies as well. And it's the warmth in Rare Exports is something Krampus doesn't quite have, that level of warmth, because the characters are kind of fighting a lot and the Krampus is unhappy, But in Rare Exports, it's you just get a sense of this father and son and their friends being so close, and it really helps that it's a real father and son as well.
Oh, really? Yeah. And so the elves are really naked, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. There's some nudity in it. It's they do their best to camouflage certain things, but it's kind of strange. I guess very Finnish in its way. If they don't seem to mind that stuff as much as maybe American audiences do, they're not as prudish.
Yeah.
In the film, the director and the father and son actors, they did a movie about 2 years ago called Sisu, and I've never seen it because it hasn't popped on streaming yet. I badly want to, though. And it's basically a Nazi era film that takes place in World War II about a Finnish soldier who's returning from battle, and he discovers gold out in the countryside, but he also runs into a battalion of Nazis who make things difficult for him to retrieve the gold and also try to kill him. And it sounds great. And based on Rare Exports, I can't wait to see this movie. It's some really great filmmaking all around.
Oh, interesting. I've not seen that movie either, but I'll have to add that one to my Christmas list. But speaking of Krampus from 2015, let's chat about that. I actually just saw that for the first time a night or two ago, and I was floored. I thought that was pretty awesome. So let's get your thoughts on that one.
Oh, I love it. I already like Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat a lot, and I thought, what's his next movie? Oh, the Krampus. I saw the Krampus in the theater, I believe, and I think it's better than Trick or Treat because it's a cohesive story whole, even though I love anthologies. And it's the movie he made before he went and did Godzilla King of Monsters, I believe. So he was building up to some giant creature stuff you can see. I think it's a modern classic. I would say it's better than Rare Exports in that it sticks the landing. And doesn't go off in sort of a weird, whimsical thing. It really remains creepy. I love the cast. Toni Collette and Adam Scott make a great pair. David Koechner is the a-hole relative. It reminds me of some a step uncle I had years ago who we don't talk to anymore, luckily, so I don't care if he hears this. But he was a meathead. He was a bit of a meathead. And so it's fun. It was fun to see some of those archetypes that I've seen in real life play out. I love the grandma in it. She's aware of the legend. The whole film has this off-kilter atmosphere and genuine darkness. I remember watching it with my son Henry. At the time, I think he was about 11 or 12. And the movie really got to him. He loved giant monster films. We're both Godzilla fans. But it really got under his skin with the family being picked off and not knowing what's going on really bothered him. And that ending, you guys had mentioned, you guys had talked about the ending and your interpretation of it. Henry saw it as they were trapped forever. And I'm like, I don't know about that. And he got upset. He won't even watch the film. Now he's 17. He still won't watch it. But I told him, I says, well, you can interpret it that way, but I do think they're being watched. So they stay good, Santa's always watching. So I like that little microcosmic world that they, that's how he's viewing them through that snow globe. Yeah, I just think the whole thing is.
So you think
tremendous.
you think they're free to leave? They're just being observed.
Yeah, that's the feeling I got. Now,
Okay.
part of that was me explaining to Henry so he didn't have an existential crisis with it, because we've talked about it recently. He goes, "What movies are you doing for this podcast?" I said, "Well, one of them's the Krampus," and he's like, "Oh." Maybe I can convince him as he gets older to check it out again and look at it from my point of view. But the Krampus himself is unbelievably, spectacularly creepy. It's the definitive Krampus movie because we've seen, of course, some ripoffs of that. There's been several Krampus movies since, and even stuff like Inside Number 9, the British anthology Hitchcock type of series. They did an episode that's based on a Krampus myth that was quite effective and has a couple of neat twists to it. But I don't think anybody's ever going to make one quite as good as Doherty's film, unless they, go in a direction that's not comedy at all and just plain scary. And maybe the closest to that, that's not Krampus, but it echoes that, is that movie Ritual. I think, or Rituals, the one that takes place in the Swedish forest and all the guys go out on a camping trip. It's on Netflix. I think it came out in 2018. And that one has a creature that kind of reminds me of that. Yeah. It's based on a Nordic myth. But yeah, to me, this is a modern Christmas classic. And one of the few that I put on the list, because there's so many Christmas movies that just don't quite nail it for me. That a lot of Killer Santa movies in recent years just haven't. They're not up there with Silent Night, Deadly Night even. They tend to be a bit more crass and focus on characters I don't like. And I want to like these characters. And I think in the Krampus, the family, some of them are jerks and they do act pretty badly towards one another. But then that's the point of the film, and there's redemption as well. Yeah, I love it.
Oh yeah, I loved it too, and you're right. I really love the characters, and it kind of had like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation feel to it.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I really really enjoyed it actually. So
yeah, it's funny. Yeah. You mentioned, I got to mention real quick, the Black Christmas. I like some of those interpretations. I didn't think of that. I also never thought of Black Christmas being a facts of life kind of setup, like a dark facts of life. And I thought that's awesome. I can just imagine you just take the lights down low, make Mrs. Garrett drink, and there you go. Just knock off Joe and Natalie and Tootie. I don't know who the final girl would be. Probably Joe.
Yeah, I think so.
The final girl. She's level-headed.
Oh my gosh. Oh, like some of these movies I think are really great, and I can't wait to add them to my list here. Like the next one that you mentioned was Silent Night from 2021, which is actually on my Christmas watch list. That's actually scheduled for Monday for me to take a look at, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this movie.
Well, this one was a big surprise. I think it was made during the pandemic or right before, but it has echoes of the pandemic, people being kind of trapped together or having to isolate. I didn't expect much from it because I had seen a couple of films prior that was sort of in the genre that just didn't move me. This one surprised me with how ruthless it was. A bunch of relatively wealthy Brits, a family and girlfriends and in-laws and stuff, they all gather for this Christmas Eve dinner. And the film starts out, you don't quite know what they're doing there, but there's a somberness to it and a tension and anxiety. And I don't want to spoil really anything, but since you haven't seen it, but there's something going on. There's something coming their way that's terrible. It's really terrible. And they're all forced to make a choice. They're all there for like one last apocalyptic Christmas dinner. And Keira Knightley's the big name in it, but the rest of the cast is terrific. And it really goes into some dark places. Even stuff like, do the kids have the right to choose certain things, and parental oversight and child autonomy and all these things is really dramatic and just oftentimes very disturbing. It's another one that I don't know if I'd watch again that often seasonally, but I do want to see it again because it got under my skin. It's funny, but very, very dark too. And once you get into the third act, it's dark.
Keira Knightley's in it. We always think of
Yeah.
her from Pirates of the Caribbean. How was her performance in this?
I thought she was great. Totally different from Pirates
Yeah.
of the Caribbean. Much more dramatic and toned down. She's not doing any stunts or anything like that.
Yeah.
And also Lily Rose Depp is in it in a slightly early role. Now she's in Nosferatu and kind of hitting the big time. But she plays, I'm trying to remember, if she plays a teenage daughter. But everybody's really top notch in the film, and it mimics a Christmas gathering where some of the people there are kind of on bad behavior, but there's also people there that really love each other. And it's kind of like a socially awkward, uncomfortable dinner up to a point, and then it really gets awkward and scary. And it had me kind of, because I saw it post-pandemic, it takes the idea of something like that occurring to a more visceral level, in a more final level. It's
right.
Yeah, I don't want to say much else to spoil it, but it really got under my skin.
Very good. So, Kirk, we've touched upon 8 of your favorite Christmas horror films, but you also gave us a list of a few others that you just want to touch upon briefly. So we'll do some quick hits on these.
Sure.
The first one is the anthology Tales from the Crypt from 1972.
Yeah.
But specifically, it's that first vignette, that first story, All Through the House, which is great.
Yeah, I love that one. I saw it as a kid, mid-70s. And I didn't remember much else about the movie but that story, because it was so disturbing. And I don't think my mom wanted me to see that, because I still believed in the big S. And later, I think I was about 10 when I finally got the reveal. But up to that point, I had never seen anything that disturbing. Why is Santa doing this? But also, Joan Collins' character and what she does. It was kind of an introduction to a more grown-up kind of horror thing, because up to that point I had seen, a lot of the Universal monsters, Godzilla, Horror Express was one of my early childhood movies, the Yorga movies, but this one was a little bit different. It took horror into a kind of a murder mystery thing, but also just the fact that he's after her was disturbing to me. And of course they've done that trope, since, but I think it's like the original classic Killer Santa movie. Sometimes I almost wish it was a feature-length film, but what they accomplish in that bit of time is great. And I love the set design, the 70s kind of gaudy weirdness of their apartment. They're wealthy Brits, and everything's covered in fur and fancy retro furniture. And Joan Collins is perfect casting as that type of character. That's a really great one.
Then from 1973, a great movie that I love, Legend of Hell House. We don't really think of that as a Christmas movie, but it does take place in December, really leading up to the Christmas season.
Yep. Yeah. And it always felt autumnal to me as well. But knowing that it's, because the title cards kind of like The Shining tell you where you're at in the film. And I think it takes place from December 17th all the way to Christmas Eve, the 24th. So the last scene in the film, or the last epic part of the film, is on Christmas Eve. And of course, these ghost hunters, they're not going to bring Christmas trees with them into the Belasco mansion, which might have been interesting. I don't know, Pamela Franklin as a comfort thing, brought some elf on the shelf or something. But I love it. It resonates as one of the great ghost stories of its time. And yeah, I do consider it a Christmas movie, even though there's not that much atmosphere in it in that regard, but there's plenty of atmosphere otherwise.
Oh, wow. Let's chat quickly about Dawn of the Dead from 1978.
Yeah, that's one I've always seen it as a Christmassy movie for a couple of reasons. Which takes place in a mall. And of course, many of us grew up around malls at Christmas time, but it was also shot from November to February. I believe, was it 1977 into 78? And they had to take a break in the Monroeville Mall during Christmas season. I think early December, they started putting up decorations, and instead of, Romero, instead of wanting to take down decorations every night, They just decided to break, and then I think they resumed filming not long after Christmas Day, and the decorations vanished. Sometimes I wish they'd had just left them up the whole time and made it a Christmas set movie. But since it takes place over a period of months, I could see why they didn't. But I always get a Christmas vibe to it. It's also a movie I watch in the dead of winter as well, because everything, the atmosphere of Western Pennsylvania with all the skeletal trees and overcast skies, and then just the mall itself, it's everything about it just feels that way to me. And I know there's several other people that feel the same. The Shining is a Christmas movie too, I think, on the same level that Dawn is, even if it doesn't say it in the script and in the movie.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree the same way with The Shining. Like that's a Christmas movie to me as well. What is it about that film that you truly love?
Well, with The Shining, it's one of my all-time favorites, and just the family being snowed in for the winter, you automatically feel like they're bunkered down, and it's an extended Christmas time. And I think the film takes place in mostly early December, after a month has passed, and it starts snowing. It's early December to like midweek of 2nd or 3rd December before it reaches Christmas Eve. The fact that it's a family too, the whole family dynamic. It seems like Kubrick was careful not to, even though it takes place in December, careful not to have Shelley Duvall going around decorating the hotel with stuff. I kind of wish she did. That would have been neat to at least have Christmas lights and stuff in a few corridors. But that's okay, because I still, get that feel from it. And maybe Kubrick and King were making them a non-denominational family that didn't celebrate. Maybe they're atheists. Who knows? I'm sure they changed their mind after dealing with the Overlook's ghosts as far as their beliefs. But yeah, I could watch The Shining any time of year, but it resonates strongest between December and like January.
Right.
Also, that maze at the end, that almost has a Christmas feel in terms of the weather and the dead of winter. It for some reason it brings that up to me.
Yeah. You could almost imagine if they had wanted to like make money from the Overlook, if it was a place that was accessible in the wintertime and it wasn't snowed in so much, you could have people up there during that season and decorate the entire hedge maze and have people walk through and pay money to be there. It's the feeling of that with the shrubbery, and it definitely has that feel. Yeah.
Another movie that you mentioned, and I love this one, 1981 Ghost Story.
Yeah. That movie, I'm pretty sure it takes place in the dead of winter, sometime in January. But there's something about the old men getting together and telling ghost stories by firelight, sipping brandy and whatnot, and the Craig Wasson's son returning home to see his family. It does have a sort of slight darker family reunion quality. And the whole film, that's another New England Gothic one for me. The snowy setting, the Alma Mobley character, everything about it, just feels Christmassy, even if it is, I think, January.
Yeah. For many years, that was a Christmas tradition, especially in England, other parts of Europe, telling ghost stories at Christmas. We don't do as much of that today, but that's definitely something that goes back to the Victorian times.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys feel this way too. Christmas time, it's a wonderful, warm time, but there's a dark eeriness to it.
Sure.
And it's a time that's not always the happiest for everybody either. Josh Hitchens mentioned that. The fact that you can have something warm and inviting, and also a lot of tragedies happen at Christmas, and you miss loved ones, things like that, and just the whole mood of it with blue and red. When I was a kid, it wasn't these white lights as much. Everything was colored lights, blue, red, green, glowing on people's shrubs through the snow. I don't see that as much now because everything's LED, or they have these spotlights that shine on people's houses. I'm old school. I like the big bulbs, those black Christmas bulbs, and there's a somber quality to it. And for me and my family, we watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Nestor the Long-Eared Donkey and all these great shows, Charlie Brown. And there's even spookiness in those. Like, I think the Rankin Bass Rudolph, you have the Bumble, and you have the Aurora Borealis and that eerie scene when they're in that little cozy cabin and Rudolph leaves and goes on the ice floe and the Aurora Borealis is above him. Just the atmosphere of Christmas, whether it's the warm part of it or the dark part of it, I just love and embrace.
And we have just one more show that you had mentioned. And you classify it as a New Year's Eve special. Let's talk about Terror Train from 1980.
Yeah, I wanted to throw this one in there. It's a favorite slasher of mine, and it's one of the few New Year's set horror films, and my absolute favorite New Year's horror film. There's a movie called New Year's Evil from 1982, but it's it's got punk rock bands in it, and it's fun and a moment of that time. But Terror Train, it is this kind of neat hybrid with, you have New Year's Eve party on a train hurtling through the Canadian wilderness. It's a masquerade party, which echoes the Halloween season. It's like this kind of a perfect little between the dead of winter and Halloween kind of movie. Jamie Lee Curtis being in it helps, but having the killer change disguises. This is a movie I could talk about at length some other time too. I just love it. It's one of those movies that really scared me as a kid, and I revisit it every year on New Year's Eve with my kids. And it always delivers. It's got beautiful cinematography from John Alcott, and the old Art Deco train is lit with all these really cool lights and reds and greens. There's just something about it it makes a really great post-Christmas appetizer almost, for when you get into the winter stuff, true winter horror.
Oh, wow. What do your kids think about it?
Terror Train? Well, I know my son Henry likes it. My daughter Grace, she's older. She loves it. Anything with Jamie Lee Curtis, I think she appreciates. But that's one that she likes, the whole switching the costume. I mean, I do too. The whole idea of the killer hopping costumes and constantly being on the move, and you never know when he's going to strike. And the whole David Copperfield red herring too. Like, I'd love having David Copperfield doing illusions. And the magicians or the killer is a magician, so you wonder, is it him? Everything about it, and including the whole inciting event, where you have the classic sorority prank gone wrong and our angry, vengeful killer. You almost kind of understand why he's so upset. Another one of those slightly sympathetic characters. It really delivers the goods, and it's spooky and fun at the same time. There's a lot of kind of some college party silliness, but the undercurrent of terror on the train, it still delivers.
Oh, wonderful.
Very good, Kirk. Great analysis of a number of Christmas films, your favorite being Black Christmas, 5 stars from 1974. Before we let you go, though, anything that you're working on? I know you've done composition for some films in the past. Anything you're writing, anything that's in the offing for you right now?
Actually, at the moment, I'm still working on my kind of classic throwback 70s vampire script. But also, strangely enough, I am working on a short story script that features Santa Claus on Christmas night. And I'm not sure if I'm going to do this as a straight short story and submit it to publishers. I might just do both, do a short film script and that. But I would love to shoot it as a short film. And it's basically a spooky, low-key Santa's visiting houses on Christmas Eve. And he visits this one house where he gets the hackles raising on the back of his neck. And there's an old foe that's present that's ancient, and he's dealt with it before. And it's not the Krampus, it's the boogeyman. And he feels this family's under threat, and that's the basic setup. So, and it's not a super Santa, violent night kind of thing, where he's kicking ass left and right. It's more of a somber, scary, almost Black Christmas kind of vibe to it. And I'm really hoping I can shoot it as a short on digital and really capitalize on the Christmas atmosphere and prowling camera work and things of that nature.
Very nice. Best of luck with that. Keep us posted on how that goes.
Oh, for sure. And one thing I wanted to mention real quick, because I know Tracy just wanted to briefly cover The Lodge. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't want you to forget that, because I listened to your podcast on that one, and I like it a great deal. I guess just to sum up my feelings, I think it's atmospheric as hell.
Mhm.
I remember the first time I saw it, I felt a twinge, without spoiling things. I wanted it to be a bit more overtly supernatural and maybe
Yes.
have the cult work in there a bit more. However, seeing it a second time, it really stuck with me and resonated, especially as the kids. God, they're such jerks. These kids, you know, they really are. It's like I've been in step family type of situations.
Mhm.
My parents divorced when I was young, so I had a stepdad, and the awkwardness of that, and the good faith that most step parents have, and
Right.
want to extend to the kids, and just have these kids be such shits.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. I don't want to swear, but they're really So the whole denouement of it, I just thought that's a great lesson to learn, like any great thriller or Hitchcock type of thing, where you kind of
Mhm.
learn a lesson of never underestimate anybody ever. And
Yeah.
that classic, I think a lot of times people use this term now, F about and find out. I know a lot of younger
Mhm.
generations say that, and these kids effed about and they found out. And I
Yeah.
remember being shook by that ending. But as I watched it again, I'm like, well, that's the only thing that could have happened. You guys pushed it, and
Mm.
Yeah.
snap.
Oh my goodness. I was curious what you thought when you had put it in your notes. So out of 5, what would you rate that movie?
Oh, I gotta give that one at least 3.5. I would say for me. I seen it the second time, and the scene with Alicia Silverstone. I can understand why you'd need to shut that off because it
Yeah.
comes out of nowhere, and it's you
Yeah.
never really understand all the dynamics between her and her husband, Richard Armitage's character.
Mm,
But you do see that who knows, maybe she was an alcoholic and it kind of drove him away. You still feel sympathy for her under the circumstances,
mhm.
but they never really focus on what made them break up, except for the girl,
Yeah.
the new girlfriend. And you're right too, it never really takes Armitage to task. Like the kids don't say, well, dad had a part in this too.
Mm.
Maybe they're just, in their own minds ameliorating that by focusing on the new stepmom. But yeah, that was a shocking bit. And I watched it with my 2 oldest, Henry and Grace, and we were just like, whoa, it just comes out of nowhere and sets
Yeah.
the tone for the rest of the film.
Whoops.
Oh, awesome. I don't have my cats down here, but I have a couple of cats. I just didn't want them jumping on my keyboard, but that's great.
Yeah.
That's Pugsley Adams.
Awesome. Yeah, we have our black cat's named Elvira.
Oh my
Nice.
goodness.
There's a
Nice.
stray that we just found in the neighborhood, and one of the best cats I've ever had.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on The Lodge.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear other people chat about that. So, because Bruce and I, we had such different opinions on this one. So, very
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad I remembered that you wanted to talk about that.
Well, Kirk, we really appreciate your time. Kirk Hazen, musical composer, historian, writer, and just generally someone very knowledgeable about the genre of horror, especially films from 1970 to the current day. Kirk, thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you guys so much for having me on. This really made my Christmas. And anytime you guys want to do it again, I'm there.
Awesome. Thank you.
We will call you on that. Definitely. Absolutely. Kirk Hazen has been our guest. Our thanks to Kirk. Of course, to my co-host and producer, Tracy Asteria. Thanks to all of you for joining us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we hope you'll visit us again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.